This standard NS2A from your workbook just deals with multiplication. So all of these problems are going to use multiplication. Remember that when we multiply same signs is a positive number. We multiply two different numbers that are different signs, we get a negative. And so we're going to look first at problem number 5. A hot air balloon is descending vertically at a rate of 18.25 feet per minute. If it continues at this rate, what number represents the vertical change of the balloon after 3 minutes? Well, it's going down, it's descending 18.25 feet per minute. So it goes down 18.25 per minute. And it's asking what will be the vertical change after 3 minutes. So it indicates that we're going to multiply. Now, we could change negative 18.25 to a decimal value because it will be a terminating decimal. 1 divided by 4 is 0.25. And then we can just multiply. A negative times a positive is a negative because they're different signs. And 18.25 times 3 is 54.75. So the vertical change would be negative 54.75 feet. Number 7, which expressions have a product that is negative? Select all that apply. So we have a negative times a negative, which is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative, and a negative times a positive is a negative. So this one has a negative product. For the next one, we have a negative times a negative, which is a positive, times a positive times a positive is a positive. Now we have a positive times a negative, which is a negative, times a positive is a negative, times a negative is a positive. We have a negative times a positive is a negative, times a positive is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a positive. And for our last one, we have a negative times a positive is a negative, times a negative is a positive, times a negative is a negative. One interesting thing you might notice are that the ones that have an odd number of negatives to be multiplied end up with a negative product, and those that have an even number of negatives being multiplied end up with a positive product. Okay, the standard 7.NS.2b all deal with division, and it uses the same integer rules that multiplication uses, that if you're multiplying or you're dividing the same signs, you get a positive result. And if you multiply or divide different signs, you get a negative result. So number 1, select all expressions that are equivalent to negative 15 divided by positive 23. Notice that it has a negative, and so you're going to end up with a negative quotient. And we look through these. 15 over negative 23, okay, that's negative. Then we have negative 15 over 23, that's negative. Negative 23 over 15 is negative, but your numerator and denominator flip, so that doesn't work. 15 23rds is positive, and then 23 over negative 15, the numerator and denominator is flipped. Number 3, the temperature decreased 20.8 degrees over 6.5 hours. What value represents the average temperature change per hour? Well, we're looking at the change per hour. So let's find out what the change was total. It decreased 20.8 degrees total. And the number of hours is 6.5 hours. So let's just divide to see the change per 1 hour. And we get negative 3.2 degrees per hour Fahrenheit. This next standard, 7.NS.2c, these deal with multiplying or dividing. Sometimes it refers to the properties, and the only property that we use heavily is distributive property. So let's look at number 4. This one uses distributive property. It says which of the following expressions can be evaluated using the distributive property. Select all that apply. And we know the distributive property is where you have a number outside the parentheses that is being multiplied by the group, so you could distribute or multiply that number to each term in the group. So we could do this second choice because 2 could be multiplied to each term. We could choose this third choice because 1/5 can be multiplied to each term. Even though it's behind the parenthesis, it still works the same way. It's still multiplying. And that is it. Number 6, what's the value of this expression? Negative 5.85 times 3 divided by 2. So we're just going to follow Pemdas, order of operations. Just a reminder, Pemdas, that tells us we would do any parentheses first, and we don't have that. Any exponents next, and we don't have that. Then multiplying and dividing, we go left to right. We do have multiplying, and then we divide. So I'm going to multiply these, and I have a negative times a positive, which is a negative. And 5.85 times 3 is 17.55. And then we just divide by 2. And so when you divide by 2, we get negative 8.775. Number 9, we're going to evaluate this expression, and it's dividing mixed numbers. So we're going to start by changing these to fractions. We're going to go around the world. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 1 is 10. So we've got 10/3, keep my negative sign, divided by 5 times 2 is 10, plus 1 is 11, over 5, and we're going to keep that negative sign. Now we're dividing fractions, so remember we're just going to use same opposite switch. We're going to keep the first fraction, negative 10/3, the same. We are going to do the opposite of dividing, which is multiplying. And then we're going to switch negative 11/5 to negative 5/11. Now that we have just a multiplication problem, we're going to multiply our numerators. 10 times 5 is 50. And then multiply our denominators. 3 times 11 is 33. And then think about your signs. We have a negative times a negative. We're multiplying the same sign, so we're going to have a positive sign. And we could leave this as 50 over 33, but we would prefer to write it back as a mixed number. So I'm going to go over here to the side and say 33 will go into 50 one time with the remainder of 17. So that would be 1 and 17/33. The last standard in this lesson, 7.NS.2, is just about converting between fractions and decimals. So let's look at this problem number 3. We want to know what the decimal equivalent is to 4 and 8/9. So first of all, 4 is the number that's a whole number, so I can leave 4 in front of a decimal. And then 8/9, I can go to a calculator and say 8 divided by 9. And in my calculator, I get 0.88888, and it just keeps on going. So it is 0.8 repeating. Number 13, what's the fraction equivalent of negative 3.8? Well, I know it's going to be negative 3 and some fraction, whatever 0.8 would be. So I have 0.8, and I want to represent it as a fraction. So I can remember what this means. This is called 8/10. I look at the place value of that 8, and I say that's 8 over its place value, 10. And then we can just reduce it. 8 and 10 will both divide by 2, since they're even numbers. And we get 4/5. And so I get negative 3 and 4/5, which is answer choice C.